Welcome to the 4 Bars Podcast. I'm Ken Leith.
And I'm Patty Leith. We are your hosts for some compelling dialogue, encouraging our listeners to strengthen their connections
And build strong communities, lifting each other up and connecting in ways that matter.
We named the podcast 4 Bars as a reference to how hard we work to find a 4 Bars connection on our devices.
And we wondered what could happen with relationships if we worked as hard at connecting.
Let's find out. Welcome back to 4 Bars. We're excited to be here again with Jessica Turner. I'm Patty Leith, your co-host.
And I'm Ken Leith.
Jess is a licensed therapist. She spoke to us in our last episode. We're really spending some time getting ready for the holidays. So welcome. Thanks for being back.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what made you decide to pursue becoming a licensed therapist?
Sure. I think most therapists get into the field because for similar reasons we want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of situations, I think we want to be that person that maybe we needed at another point in life, or, we had a great experience with a therapist that was really a pivotal moment. And so we want to be that for another person. So going into it, I've known I wanted to do this since I was in high school, weirdly enough. And it's just taken different twists and turns. I used to think I really wanted to work with kids because I've wanted to be there for kids in the way that, maybe I needed someone when I was a kid. And so then it's funny because I went through grad school, started working, and realized I actually don't like kids. So I was like, well, this is interesting. And so I've pivoted to working with adults and find that I enjoy that much, much more. And so, it's a little different than what I thought it was going to look like. But the why is still the same. Being able to make a difference. Going through grad school, I told myself if I make a difference in one person's life someday, it's all worth it. Trying to make the world a better place.
That is awesome. It's a great reason. By the way, I love it.
I started my graduate career thinking that I wanted to get into therapy for children.
Okay.
And going into child psych, and changed it, realizing for a lot of reasons I made the shift to go into organizational psychology.
Yeah.
And I made my career mostly working on organizational dynamics and team dynamics over the years, but had a similar, pivot to that. But in doing so, learned a lot about human development and how we become the adults that we become. That's
so interesting when you really start getting into why are humans the way that they are.
Really is.
I've asked myself that many times, why am I the way I am?
I always say we're part, it's part nature, it's part nurture.
100%.
And I think our personalities are made up of a lot of experiences that went well, we do more of that. And if they didn't go as well, we do less of that. And, and if you want to change something, you kind of have to unpack why it's there.
Absolutely.
Right?
And identify that it even is there.
A
lot of times that's the first step is someone will come in and say, I know I don't feel great, but I don't know why. Right. Or I don't know what is causing me to feel this way. So a lot of times at the beginning of therapy, we're just trying to figure out and unpack what it is that's causing the distress.
Because sometimes we don't even know.
No,
right?
Absolutely. So we're going to pick up from last session, this time around the holidays again, but exploring a little bit more about the situations where we're in and how do we deal with those situations when whether it's family, friends, or not having those supports and stuff, and those expectations that come with the holidays. How do we create an environment and tools to be able to cope better during the holidays?
So I think having a good, healthy support system is really key there, because we could have all the people around us in the world, and that doesn't necessarily make anything better if that support system is not a good one for you, right? If, you are really close to your family, but your family brings you a lot of stress, maybe because of differences or, last time we talked about trauma, right? Like maybe this person has caused me a lot of pain and we haven't really ever addressed that. And so you can be spending all this time around family, but it might not be doing you any good and might be making things a lot worse. And so it really, I think, starts with having a healthy, positive community for you, whatever that means. A lot of times it maybe isn't the family that you were born into. We have this concept of a chosen family, right? And people that we choose to spend our time with. And usually if you're choosing to spend your time with that person, they're a better person for you. It's because you feel better when you're around them.
I think we, being here in Northwest Arkansas in a very fast growing community, We've come to know people through our community that we live in, but also in the greater community of people who came here who didn't have family. So they've had to develop their family, to your point, choosing them along the way. And I actually came from a large family. But so I was just used to family, the dynamic of I was born in this family. When I got here, it's like, oh, we have to create it. And so no one is within a lot of the close group we are in our community is really from the region. And so that created a commonality, I think, to help us to first click and connect together.
Absolutely. One of the central themes I talk about with all of my clients is the sense of like having a solid support system. Obviously, if you're in therapy, you're navigating difficult things in life, and you need people in your corner to help you do that. And so something that I talk to people about all the time is this area is full of transplants, which is great because this area is full of people who are looking to meet people. Right? There's always somebody here that's new that is trying to make a friend. And so even if you're local, you don't know all the people here because there's new people every day, which is really cool. And it's a really great opportunity to find that sense of community in a way that's going to be healthy for you.
That's very good.
So as we enter the holiday season, we're all going to be around the table with our communities, whether that is our immediate family or our chosen family or a community that we're not yet that ingrained in. And there will be differences of opinions, especially now. Post-election, there's a lot of differences of opinions. What are some techniques and strategies that people can use to navigate that? I have a friend who recently had a wedding and she was worried that might come up. So she set the guidelines in advance for everyone.
Absolutely. And that is a big part of it. Boundaries. Yes. That is one of the most common words that comes out of my mouth with clients, and just with my friends, because boundaries. This is something every year around the holidays that comes up with clients when we're talking about the stress of going home. It's typically with our families that people are finding, because often with your chosen family, you're spending time with them because you have the commonality. And so you maybe won't have to navigate those differences in the same way. But political differences over the last couple of years has been a real big area of discussion. And so what we talk about is setting boundaries, setting up expectations before you even go spend time with your family. Shooting as texts in the family group chat or calling your whoever and saying, I need there to not be any talk about politics, right? I don't want us to argue over the Thanksgiving table. We don't align here. We don't need to talk about it. And then asking that person, like, are you okay with this? And you're not asking really for them. You're asking for you, because if they say no, well, then you can establish a new game plan. Maybe that means you don't go. Right. If they're not willing to respect that boundary, that's a good indicator that, it's not going to be a good time for you.
Yes.
And a lot of times people are like, yeah, let's do that, because they don't want it either. Right. And so that's really, I think, the biggest thing is setting up the expectation before the event itself comes. And then if, the conversation starts to trend in that direction, saying, hey guys, remember, we're not talking about this.
Self-limits. Right. We all agree.
Reminding.
The correlation there of what we do for a living is a bit very connected. As you have to have your plan, your strategy. What that is.
You gotta have a game plan.
And then you need to set the ground rules with respect to that, so that then you can execute upon what should be a really good experience for everyone.
Right. We're here to eat turkey and, enjoy each other. Let's make it about that. And that's another thing I talk about with people is, whenever you're going into what you feel might be a difficult conversation, setting your goal and your hope for the conversation at the beginning, right? So saying, my hope is that we can have Thanksgiving and enjoy and like just spend time together, right? Without this conflict. And asking, do you also want that?
Right.
Presumably the answer is yes. And so then you can say, okay, here's how we make that happen. And that way, if the conversation starts to go sideways, you can say, remember, this is what we're hoping to get out of this situation, right? Like having that as kind of a baseline you can go back to, right?
Sounds good. What if I get to my event that I'm going to and it doesn't go as discussed or as planned. How do I navigate that?
Yeah, sure. And so we talked about, having a game plan for the holidays. And so sometimes that means you go for a walk to get a break from things. And sometimes it's a matter of, hey, remember, we're not talking about that. Like we're trying to keep things civil here. And hopefully just that reminder of the boundary, right? Because if we've established the boundary going in and that person has agreed to it, it should only take a gentle reminder to get back to that.
True. That ground rule.
Right.
Yeah.
It should. Doesn't always. And if so, that might be, sometimes we do have to set an ultimatum of like, I've asked for, I've set this boundary. I've asked for this to happen. And if we can't do that, unfortunately, I'm going to have to go.
This is,
And then sticking to whatever that ultimatum or that limit was.
Yeah.
But if I don't do that in advance, because maybe it didn't come up the last time we were all together for a holiday.
Sure.
And it starts to get really heated.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that I can do?
Yeah. Hey guys, this doesn't seem like a productive conversation for us to have. Like, hey guys, I think this is bringing me a lot of stress. Can we not?
Can we not? That's a perfect, simple way
Can we
to.
not?
Yeah.
I think, we can have some levity in that, right? Especially with your family. You should be able to have that. And so just like, hey, let's not. Right.
Without heated emotion.
Right.
Like, I cannot do this. Right. But yeah,
absolutely.
that might be what your inside voice is saying. But
inside, it's like panic, red alert, red alert. But let's not. Yeah. Like, hey guys, let's not do this.
When you're doing that red alert, I'm going back to, we recently saw Inside Out too. So with the anxieties and anger and all these things they're real.
Right.
With respect to that, I mean, they did a fantastic job in both the movies of really exploring in our personality and how we're wired and made up of different things.
Absolutely. We're a big fan of the Inside Out movies in my field.
Yes, I bet you are. It's so incredibly accurate.
It is.
And it also, this one really got into some of the way that these emotions begin to introduce themselves as we're teenagers. And I know a lot of how we decide to be adults has to do with how we process that.
Right. They get a little more complex.
They do.
Right? It's not just the happy, the sad, the mad. Right?
Yes.
When our ability to recognize and control gets more I want to say mature, but it gets more experienced.
Right. So
we have more at our disposal as it gets more complicated.
And we're hopefully a little more self-aware.
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully. As a child, it might have taken me a little bit longer to get there, but
that's okay. You're there now.
During the pandemic, we offered a series of conversations on how to navigate differences, and we called it Shock Talks, and it stood for Stop Hatred, Offer Caring and Kindness.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of feedback from participants in Shock Talks that when they got into a discussion about differences, there was an ability to keep it less emotional and really inquire about a point of view as opposed to just shutting it down. Do you recommend that?
Situation dependent. I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think something I always say is like, you're the expert on you, right?
Okay.
So you know what your limits are.
yes.
You're also probably a pretty good, you've got a pretty solid read on your family or whoever it is you're spending that time with.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to be very honest with ourselves and say, am I capable of doing this? And is this group of people capable of doing this?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And so I would say, I would answer that depending on if the rest of the group is going to be receptive to that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not worth, because it's going to, things can devolve even more from that. So,
I think around a holiday table, we're really any community gathering, storytelling is it's a powerful way to connect.
Absolutely.
And so what are some of the fundamentals of storytelling in a holiday situation?
That's a good question. I think there is certainly, I think around the holidays, sometimes that's really the only time you're seeing that group of people all in that, in one space in that setting. And so a lot of times you're catching up. Right.
Yes.
And so that's always a really good pivot from, you set that boundary or you try to, contain what could become a dicey situation. And then you pivot back to, here, let me tell you about XYZ, right? Let me tell you about this exciting thing at work or that sort of thing. And so I think really it's just like sharing things that you find interesting because other people are going to find them interesting as well, right? And that establishes some common ground, and then that can kind of get things back on track and steer them away from the sort of landmines that a lot of us are trying to avoid.
Yeah, it is a good way to kind of redirect the thinking, because then people will share their stories about similar kinds of things.
Yeah.
And, so I think it's a powerful tool. We really elevated a lot in the nonprofit work that we do to unform bias, because bias is the story we fill in when we don't know the story.
Right.
Yes.
But storytelling in and of itself is a really strong relationship builder.
Absolutely.
Helps us find our common ground.
Absolutely. And I think asking clarifying questions, you know, like, what do you mean by that? Or can you say more about that?
Yeah.
To really dig deep and really find that common ground. Because sometimes from the surface, it doesn't feel like there's much, but we just really have to get underneath.
Right.
Absolutely.
Or hadn't thought about it that way. Can you shed more light on why you you know, what makes you think that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Can you expand on that?
Yeah.
I think the other thing about storytelling and holidays, a lot of times it's nostalgic.
Absolutely.
And it's nostalgia, especially, and we've come to find at this point in our lives with, you know, having this family that we've created here locally, within our neighborhood and stuff, is that you don't necessarily have to be where you grew up together to now have these nostalgic stories, because you're reliving things forever, whether it's the last 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, and you start to hear the same stories. But we like to have those. It seems like they're almost like comfort food or something. What is it about nostalgia that we connect to as human beings?
That's a great thought. I think I haven't really ever thought about it, but I think, you know, in thinking about it, a lot of times, you know, when we think of something that's nostalgic, it's reminding us of a time when things were happy, right? When things felt good, because we're generally not going to keep bringing up things that weren't so good. And so just the idea of something being nostalgic in and of itself, I think that like there's an air of positivity, right? In that. And so wanting to revisit those happy times, right? The good old days, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's an emotion like dessert.
Yeah, that's funny. I haven't thought about it that way either. But you're right. Yeah.
Like
it is sort of a revisiting of the good old times. When we started the conversation, you said boundaries. Can you speak a little bit to how we set boundaries as an individual?
With others, or
kind of with others, and then, you know, inside of our own understanding where we want those boundaries to be.
Sure. People do not have to understand or agree with your boundaries in order to respect them. And so being very firm whenever you are trying to set boundaries, because if you are what I like to call a recovering people pleaser, like myself, it's very hard to set boundaries sometimes because we think, again, there's this idea of that, oh, this is selfish, or I shouldn't be asking for these things. You can ask for whatever you want. You may not always get it, but you can ask for whatever.
Yes.
And so I think solid strategies for setting boundaries are being very clear, very concise, and not over-explaining. We tend to get into this habit of giving all these reasons for why we're setting the boundary we're setting, because we think, oh, that's more evidence for it, right? If I have all these reasons, then it's going to feel more valid. But really what that does is it just gives an opportunity for the other person to pick apart all these bullets, right? Yes. There's more to argue about versus if you just say, this is what I expect.
And it's also adds in a detailed level of complexity that people may not follow or check out from.
Right.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
I know I as a person, I like to think that, you know, I definitely have some boundaries, but I do like to make experiences for people.
Sure.
And I don't typically get stressed out by those experiences. But what happens if a person is set in their mind their boundaries, maybe even, but they struggle with maintaining those boundaries themselves? How do they cope with that and deal with that?
I think we have to assess why they're struggling, right? Or am I struggling with maintaining this boundary because it's not actually a really great boundary for me to have, or it's not a realistic boundary for me to have? Or am I struggling because other people are not respecting that and I'm not holding them accountable? Because then the strategy is going to be different, right? Because I think we should be, ongoing. We should be assessing, is this still a good boundary for me to have? Because our needs change. And so sometimes those boundaries may have to shift, and that's okay. And a lot of times when we're implementing new boundaries with others, especially, you'll get some pushback, or the person, innocently forgets and they, do whatever you ask them not to do. And we have to remind them. People have a really hard time with reminding people about their boundaries because they think, well, I said it already. Why should I have to tell you again?
Yes.
Sometimes it is innocent. It's a habit that this person has formed, and they didn't mean, they didn't knowingly do it intentionally. And so you're just like, quick reminder.
Yeah.
I think that's actually good, because sometimes I think we think people knowingly and do something intentional.
Absolutely.
And somewhere about giving grace and understanding intention.
Yeah. That's a huge thing, I think, is not assuming intent, because typically when we're assuming intent, we're assuming ill intent.
Yes.
Most people aren't assuming good intentions in others all the time. We think, oh, that person is late for the meeting. They obviously don't care, or they're being disrespectful, right? There's, our brains don't typically go to all the reasons that maybe of why that they're late, right, to that meeting. And so we always have to assume, or we always have to operate assuming that people are doing the best that they can. Because naturally, you're going to have more empathy, more compassion, and also less frustration, right?
Yes.
If I think that you are doing the best that you can do, even if you're late to the meeting, I know that you're doing your best, right? Versus if I'm thinking that you're being late on purpose, I'm going to have much different feelings towards you. And so it's a part of protecting your peace, too, by assuming good intent.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And most people generally are doing their best.
Well, not as someone who knows Ken quite well, because we're married, I think Ken doesn't set boundaries because you have a high degree of confidence that most things don't bother him.
Sure.
I'm not similarly equipped. I work at my confidence,
right,
and therefore have to really keep myself in situations that that enable me to continue to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that brings up a good point of your boundaries might look much different from mine, and that's okay.
Yes.
Right. I think, we hear about boundaries, or we hear someone else talking about boundaries, or on TikTok or wherever you see this therapist talking about, here's boundaries to set with your family. That may or may not be good for you because your bandwidth is going to be different than mine.
Yeah, no, I like that. And, to that point, I don't expect my boundaries or the things for me to be the same as other people.
Right.
I do know mine are a byproduct of kind of the way I was raised for the most part, and those experiences, like many of us. For me, to your point too, I think of people as intent generally is they're going to come with good intent.
Sure.
Now, I can find out otherwise.
Sure.
I also am wired that I expect people to be different from me. So when they're similar, I'm just pleasantly pleased.
Sure.
And when they are different, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just the way I was or a coping thing, but it's the way I look and view things. I'm one of the people who we talk about, do you give respect or make people, or I give it. Now, if someone loses it though, it's really hard to get it back.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. In that scenario.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because I think the way that your framework is why you're able to be so easygoing, right? Because I think you are probably in the minority of expecting everyone else to be different from you, right? A lot of people expect other people to operate the way that we operate because I'm operating the best way, obviously. You should be doing the same. And then we get frustrated when they're different, but it's like, my expectation of you is my problem, right?
Yes.
It's not your problem.
That's really good insight. Really good insight.
I like that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, I love it.
I say a lot of times other people's expectations of you is their problem. So it's only on you to manage your own expectations.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I am similar to you. I know because of the work that I do, people are different, but I am always surprised.
Yeah. It's like do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Yeah.
I am always surprised.
I know these things, but do I operate that way?
Yeah.
One last area to explore is you mentioned a good support system, and that really is probably friendships that you're building.
Sure.
Can you speak a little bit about best ways to make friends?
Do what you would do because you want to do it. And so what I mean by that is, for example, a big source of my friend group I met at Blake Street, you know,
Same.
and so I met them because I was going to the same workout classes every day. And I'm a cat, so I stay in my back corner every day. I have my spot, and I didn't talk to people for a while, but naturally you see the same faces, you're going to start talking. And you already have a commonality, right? You're focusing on your wellness, for like if you meet in a workout class, for example, or you know, hanging out at a bookshop. You're going to find people that like to read. It's automatically an area of connection and an area of commonality. And that's a really solid foundation for building a friendship with that person. So just do what you enjoy doing and not putting yourself in situations that you wouldn't normally be in or that you don't enjoy being in just because you're trying to meet people there.
Right. And because then they're going to want to go back and do that. And if you don't enjoy it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. With finding partners too, I hear about, you know, people saying, well, where's a good place to meet a guy? And a lot of times you'll hear like church or park or wherever. But if you don't go to church, you might find a man at church, but are you guys going to have anything in common? Right? Maybe not. Right? Or if you don't drink and you're going to bars to meet people, are you going to have anything to talk about? Probably not. Versus if that's not what I do, and I don't go there to meet people, you know, I go wherever I want to go.
Right.
I'm going to meet people that are interested in the same things as me.
And I think that's a really good call out because around the holidays, there seems to be a heightened level of loneliness that you hear about and things of that nature. So what do I do during the holidays to help combat that loneliness?
Sure. I think we have to look at, you know, what is contributing to that. So one, I think, is kind of what we talked about, the idealistic view of the holidays, right? It's supposed to be this time of togetherness. And so if you're focused on how much you're supposed to be around other people, you're going to notice that you're not doing that to the extent that you're, quote, supposed to be. Right. And so just checking in with yourself there. But I think also, you know, naturally around the holidays, it's colder. We're not outside as often. So we're going to be inside or at home more than we are in the summer when it's warm and sunshine and we're outside. And so I talk to people, like I was recently talking to some friends about holidays are coming, seasonal depression's coming. Let's start, you know, a new book club or something that is a routine thing to look forward to.
I like it.
Trying to create some structure, right? Because a lot of times we lose that outside of the kind of gatherings, the planned events. And so preemptively trying to be proactive about going in and establishing some sort of like community.
Yeah. And making the effort to do it proactively.
Yeah.
Right. I love it.
Absolutely. Well, this has been from us very educational. And thank you. For those who are watching the podcast, I'm hoping that this is very beneficial for them, especially through the holiday season, but well beyond, because the things that you talked about are not just for the holidays, they're for every day of our lives.
We might just need them a little more around the holidays. But
and we might feel bad for needing them.
Right. But thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's lovely talking with you. Yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun. And happy holidays to all of you out there.
Yes, indeed. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
We'll look forward to our next episode. And until then, we'll see you next year.
Yeah. Great.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
The 4 Bars podcast has been brought to you by Edges Inc., a growth advisory firm based in Bentonville, Arkansas. I founded the company in 2001.
Edges promotes growth of people, companies, and ideas. Our team collaboration tool, called Interface Methods, is a basis for teams to work together more collaboratively, understand each other, and accept differences and address challenges together.
We also started a nonprofit called Unform Your Bias. We teach kids and their adult influencers how to utilize storytelling as a means to reduce bias in the world. We hope you'll check us out, subscribe to our podcast, and look at our websites.